Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists. All right, welcome back to the podcast, everyone, for another episode of Let's Torture Our Guests with Technology.
Yeah, I feel like that's it's the benchmark. It's like the Barbara Walters thing. It's like if we can make the guest cry, but this is not making the guest cry because of our hard-hitting questions. It's making them struggle through the technological difficulties.
I think any of our guests who have been on will attest to the challenges of, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Check. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Well, you and I do it every week as well. We just went through our own little bout of that. But yeah, I'm feeling good. We're recording a little bit later. We got a completely unexpected snowstorm here in Santa Fe. So,
oh, you did?
Yeah.
How often do you get snow in Santa Fe?
It's not infrequent. What happens a lot of times is like it'll come in, we're up in the mountains. We're pretty high up here, okay. 6,500 feet, I guess. Altitude's pretty high up here. But we get these mountain snowstorms that aren't expected. And all of a sudden it's like, it's white out and you can't really see. And there's 1/4 of an inch of snow and ice on the road, which is not anything that you guys are unaccustomed to.
Right. But do you guys have the equipment, the salt trucks, the plows, that kind of thing? What
they do is it's not really even salt. I think they're just digging up red sand and just dumping red sand everywhere because there's so much sand in the desert, so they just put that everywhere. I don't know if it's actual salt, but
yeah. Well, you're back from a big trip here, so you just came back from the gem show with Susan, right?
Yeah, the Tucson Gem Show. Man, what a crazy experience to be a purchaser as opposed to flip the tables and to walk into these booths and be the one with coin in my pocket and money to spend and looking for certain things too. That was pretty fascinating. I loved being on that side of it.
Did you like playing the other side of the coin on that, kicking the tires and letting them run?
There was this one German stone cutter who, they are famous for being able to have the technology and the patience to cut stones in Germany. And apologies to the jewelers out there. I don't really know what I'm talking about, right? I'm plus oneing this event. I'm Mr. 2D, and
you're interpreting what you have gathered from what Susan says.
So I am bound to say some things that are incorrect, but this is the way that I saw it. But she was talking about, Germany being famous for stone cutting. And we walked into this one, and we have this specific, she has this specific client. She's been looking for a stone. And there sits the most spectacular piece of tourmaline that we'd well, obviously I haven't seen that much of it, but it's just this thing. And so it's back and forth, and it might be a bigger stone. So we had to take pictures of it, put it on the back of her hand, rotated the videos, catching the light of this thing, like really talking
like how it's faceted and stuff.
Yeah. And but we were B-backs. Like, oh, there's the amazing stone. Leave, talk to the client, come back, see if we can get it on. I don't know what it's even called. It was like, get it on. I don't even know what the word that she used. Basically, it means a lot of these gem dealers will have clients, these jeweler clients, that they will just send a package of gems to, and they make their selections and ship back what they don't want. They didn't know us from Adam, so we weren't.
Yeah, they're not going to take the risk on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Plus, I didn't realize this whole thing with customs, and I'm sure our good friends, that have to go back and forth to Canada all of the time, would know this kind of thing. Whether it's Marjolaine Vanderhart or George Robb, but they're going back and forth to Canada. They have to have these inventory lists. So the Germans are not, if they haven't sold that gem, they can't leave it behind. And or maybe that's bullshit. We've talked about sales all of the time. Maybe they're just trying to get us to buy it. But anyway, we were back and forth 3 or 4 different times, tried to get it to just ship to the client to see if she liked it. Then we're back. And then she's like, okay, now what would you do with this gem? And then this was a really cool experience too. Like, getting to play amateur jewelry designer and going out and sketching and having a having a coffee and sketching in the thing and like back and forth on the back of a program, like, here's what we do and all this stuff. So she ended up buying it. But this is after like the fourth time. But to see that from the other side, the fourth time we're back, and we might as well have just been like holding our credit card out, straight out and walking and being led by this thing like it's a, finding.
They're like, we've got them.
Oh,
they're doing it.
But yeah, and they were psyched and we were psyched too. Like, the way that works, we're not really asking for a deal or anything because you pass the price on to your client, to be honest.
Right.
At that point.
That's like the raw materials price. I mean, I can't negotiate less for my glass or whatever. It's the raw materials that go into the piece.
Exactly. And then that's what we talked about like that whole week while we were there, about there 3 or 4 days. But talking about the fact that like some of the gems she was buying, it was like, building a house, you're buying lumber. Some of the stuff that she's buying is like, oh, wow, I think we're going to splurge on the Peller windows and and the Wolf stove, some of those things. But she ended up bringing home some really nice, as ethical as sourced as they could be gems. Just some really cool things to inspire throughout the next few years.
Well, jewelers I've talked to who experienced that, I've never talked to Susan about this, but it's like, I know on the one hand, the gems are such a huge expense for the work. And so it's almost like you show up and you've got to like have the funds in hand to buy all of your inventory for however long you're going to be working on. So there's a bit of risk, but then there's also that exuberance of getting inspired by what you see and what you can turn that stuff into.
Absolutely. Plus there's the stress, right? The anxiety of, she is a very talented gem setter, but the jewelers out there will attest to this. It's like, it doesn't matter how talented you are. If you do something slightly wrong, you can crack, you can break really expensive gem very easily. And, like I was talking about with like ethically sourced stuff, she really enjoys working with some gems sometimes that have inclusions, and those inclusions will make a stone weaker at a certain point that you didn't expect. And man,
that's kind of a surprise in the structure of it.
Yeah, and thinking about like our friend Betty Yeager, who's been on the show, she works with monster gems, just these huge honking, just statement pieces. So the stress in dealing with those things. So I don't know. Hats off to our jeweler friends out there listening.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a kind of fun experience.
Yeah, it was awesome.
On the other side of all that.
Yeah, I loved it. Also, dude, it is the most sexist industry you've ever seen. Like,
serious?
Oh my God!
How so?
Like, she's the one, right? And I'm like, I'm the 6'2" white 50-year-old guy walking around in the black coat. And
holding her coat for her.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm carrying the bags, dude. Like I am 100% just beast of burden on this trip. Just whatever she needs. Need a coffee, need a whiskey to calm your nerves after you just bought those sapphires. I mean, It's just crazy though, because I'll be standing kind of behind her. Yeah. And the gem dealers only want to talk to me. They're like, oh, how are you, sir? How are you? And I'm like, okay.
Did you throw the I'm the eye candy, this is the artist over here? Did you use the Phil Crone line?
I did say that to this woman who was working, and she flirted with me so hard after that. She's like, you are the eye candy. And I was like, oh, that didn't. It didn't quite land the way I thought it would. Anyway, we ended up using it though. Okay. I mean, you're not going to correct the industry for being sexist like that. Yeah. So a lot of times I stood behind her and just kind of whisper in her ear. Okay. And she would then talk to them, and they don't know what I'm most of the time I'm whispering in her ear like, I don't know what the fuck I'm looking at.
Like, I'm going to go get a coffee right now.
Right. My leg hurts. But she goes through and makes all of the deal, and it's all done. And she's used her Delta Amex and gotten all the points, brought out the metal card.
Definitely.
And done all of the stuff. She's made the transaction. Then they look at me and are like, thank you very much, sir. And I'm like, you blew it, dude.
Oh, that just makes it gross, doesn't it?
Yeah. But it's, I don't know. There were so many cool things, Douglas. It was like there's a upstairs high-end wholesale jewelry show,
Oh.
which is actual booths and finished product.
Oh.
And then downstairs, there's this huge convention center area where there are all these different gem booths. The high-end jewelry show, like we were downstairs looking and we walked through the high-end jewelry show. There were a couple of artists that we knew.
Oh, okay.
Spoke
like
to.
in our realm,
Yeah.
like in the art fair circuit, or
More of those Santa Fe
okay.
jewelers around. They don't really do shows, but so as we're walking around the show, one of the jewelers that I had seen upstairs came downstairs to price a giant diamond
Oh,
for one of her clients.
I see. Okay.
And and how cool is that? You've got like at your disposal a basement where you can go price out gems.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
like how handy.
Right.
I'm like, it was like, well, here, how about, hey, can I take this upstairs? And oh, yeah, of course, here, take it upstairs. So she takes it upstairs and shows her client like 4 of the best diamonds that they're possible. Oh, can you hang on? Like, how many of us have walked to the truck to go get that piece of artwork to show their client?
Because
Instead,
we
they're
knew.
going to the basement to go pick out a 4-carat diamond.
Right. I'm guessing, obviously, the person selling the gems and the jeweler have this relationship because, like we've talked about, many other jewelers talk about that you can't turn your back for a second because stuff walks away. I'm sure there's security issues and all that kind of stuff going on at the show.
Oh, there were cops at every. I mean, this is crazy. Like there were police at every aisle, every exit. They all had walkie-talkies. There are cameras everywhere.
Mm.
This was interesting too.
Okay.
You know, it's a big time show. Didn't think about this, and I've never really run across this in our industry. And seeing devout Jewish artists or gem dealers, there were a lot of devout Jewish dealers who on Friday evening, as the sun is starting to go down, there goes the sign.
Oh.
Goes up. We're closed until Sunday.
Oh.
So
Okay.
can you even imagine missing out on a huge day,
show day
like that? But
Right. That is, it's important. It's important to them and their belief. And so, I mean, it makes sense. To me, that would be very strange to commit to a venue like that and only be open for part of the time.
Right. But yeah, just, never seen it before. Just kind of interesting.
Cool.
So like, wow, that's a commitment. You
Right.
know?
Yeah, totally. Cool.
Well, Douglas, we were timing out our recording again, and I realized we're timing this thing out so that you can actually do something that I hadn't heard you tell me you had to do in a long time.
That's right.
I want to tell the folks what you've been up to this week.
I was able to walk on my own 2 feet back into the glassblowing studio this week. That was quite an exciting moment, I will say.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thanks.
We've all been rooting for you, and that's fantastic news. How did it go?
It's an interesting week. On the one hand, it is extremely frustrating and difficult and yet all exhilarating all at the same time because it's been months of chilling, months of waiting. And I get so much of my sense of purpose and being by doing stuff. And so
Right.
being in the studio, the timing is off, the physicality is off, but it feels really good to be like working my way back. So that's the silver lining in it all.
Yeah.
So I've had to kind of redefine what a day is for me. I mean, we all have this kind of idea of what we want to accomplish during the day. For us, it was we wanted to fill our annealing oven with pieces. So we would schedule time around how much time it was going to take to fill that. Well, I have to be a little kinder to myself, as it's an expression you use a lot, is I just have to accept where my physical limitations are and say, you know what? I don't have to be back where I was 6 months ago or even a year ago for that matter.
Right. Even if you had not had this surgery on your foot.
Yeah.
If you had just sat on your butt for 3 months, just watching Netflix and eating bonbons, like if you hadn't had the surgery, you just decided to take a 3-month break, that part is out of shape,
It's the type of work we do specifically, there's so much muscle memory and timing going on. I'll kind of go back to the conversation that I had with Amber Marshall in our first season, that so much of glass blowing is those drills and skills kind of thing, like an athlete would do, where let's say you throw the ball up with one hand and then you just know you're going to grab it with the other hand just by sticking out without necessarily looking or timing or planning. because you just have that flow and that rhythm going with glass blowing. And so all of that is having to be relearned again. So that's interesting. It's good.
It's like, it's spring training for everyone.
It's spring training, exactly.
You're doing some drills, playing a little fungo.
But I'm bringing the afternoon nap back. That's been a nice treat.
Nice. Good. Yeah, I've been trying to slowly work my way back into the studio just from resting stuff. So I'm feeling your pain and empathy just there, just trying to kick my butt into gear.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of custom work. And how do you handle I was going to ask you this, like when you guys have custom pieces, do you like try to clear all of the custom work before you get to work on stock for your upcoming show season? How do you guys do it?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that because I did post on social media that the exciting news that we're starting back in the studio. I should have thought about what I was doing because it did. It brought out all of the people who've been waiting for us to make them some stuff. And I've had to kind of be like, well, we're still trying to, we got a full show lineup ahead. And on the one hand, people wanting stuff now is money in the hand. You know what I mean? So you got to jump at that. But on the other hand, I kind of need to get the whole rhythm back. So it is a little tricky, kind of holding them off a bit and saying just a little bit longer till we get into the flow. And we kind of want to start working on, let's say, a particular thing we made. And then we want to move on to the next thing we made and kind of get proficient in every area, instead of just having everything we do be up for grabs for they want to place an order or something like that. So that's just been a little bit of what surprised me this week with people getting excited to come knocking back on the door again.
That's absolutely, that happens with my wife all of the time where she'll post something that she's excited about. Like even posting at the gym show that she's gone and showed some pictures on Instagram. She's got this huge number of followers and when she posts something and it's immediately like, I'm like, oh my God, it's so soul enriching to get these new gems and so what about my ring? Like immediately, just like, what about my ring? I want my ring. What about the ring that you said you'd make? And it's like, thanks for stealing my joy. I typically will do one for you, one for me. That's how I handle it.
Interesting.
Like I just finished a huge commission. It was one of these pieces. It had a lot of custom elements to it and stuff that was a little out of my wheelhouse that I was, it took me a lot longer than a typical painting would take me.
Okay.
So now I'm in the studio and I'm going to start something fresh.
Okay.
Like just do something for me for stock. I've still got 4 other custom pieces that are kind of breathing down my neck a little bit. I gave them an early promise date on it because I let's be honest, I've paid the rent for the year. Like I said last week, I had to pay the rent for
all the booth fees, all the applications,
all the booth fees.
Right.
Yeah, it's like let's take the brokest month an artist has and make them pay for a month. That's a pet. It's a pet peeve. But what are we going to do? It's just the way they're trying to plan their shows out. So I can't blame them. It's just a pain in the ass. That's why we have credit cards, right?
I guess so.
I guess. Anyway,
so there was one other topic I wanted to bring up with you that I kind of had on my notes. I've been kind of kicking down the line since we talked to Ben Fry a while ago. And as I was working on the talk with Trés and Helene, it kind of came back up again. And it was that whole idea of making work for an outcome. She talks about in this episode this week how when you go through schooling, you make your work for the critique. Or as art show artists, we make work for the collector who's going to buy from us. Well, I'm thinking back to what Ben was talking about is making work for the jury. So we're making work to get into a show because we want to ultimately have a place to sell our work. But then there's that other aspect of what if that stuff that is revered by the jury isn't so much revered by the buying public? What if they want something different?
Yeah. That's a great topic. I feel like there are artists out there that do jury bait. And I talked to, and it's not my quote, but it's like, oh, this is going to get me in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an interesting thing. I just saw on one of the major shows, and I don't know what to do with this information because I don't want to be a narc.
Okay.
it's like one or two right there on there is a booth full of stuff that he's not actually going to show.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's really egregious. And his booth is not going to look anything like that when they show up. I've seen him do that at several of the major shows. And it's like, we all put our best foot forward. But where do you draw the line when it's not even work you're going to show?
Yeah.
It's not even stuff you're going to show up with, and it doesn't look anything like it. And this smug son of a bitch is trying to game the jury. And I don't really know what to do. I don't want to be a narc, but at the same time, I'm really ticked off by it.
Right.
So that's maybe a different topic.
No, I think that it does fall into that idea of some people will feel like they have to submit applications that isn't congruent with what they're going to show. They get in, and I think that's totally wrong because the show is trying to maintain a sense of quality, and then that's extra work for the show on the ground to have to police that stuff and say, hey, 1% of your booth is what you juried in with, and the other 95% or whatever I said for quoting the percentages is not it.
Right.
So,
I mean, I guess what I'm saying too, I feel phenomenally lucky that I jury in with the stuff that I'm going to show.
Yeah. So you don't even have to think about it.
How lucky is that? But, it's like we're all making new work at all times. And there are times when I'm making a new piece that doesn't necessarily look exactly like what I juried with, but you can recognize my style and it's never changing in style.
Absolutely. I mean, that can be such a super hard thing to navigate around between, creating the same old stuff that you submit for your jury and then you show up with that exact stuff, or are you showing up with an extension of what you show in the jury that is still your style, still your flavor. It is congruent with the whole body of work. I think it's the thing that drives a lot of us artists nuts, really. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. It makes me insane. It's a hot topic for me, I guess, but I think we all do it to some extent. You're like, okay, I want to get into this great show, right? Here are my 4 best things.
The 4 best things I make, right, exactly. Doesn't mean that the stuff that is a little more cash and carry, let's say, isn't quality produced, but it isn't the thing you might want to show the jury. Let's say the things that are in a price point that is more like desirable to the masses,
Sure. Yeah, you're not going to post a picture of your $100, whatever. Yeah. I've got these little sketches that I'll do sometimes that I'll sell. It doesn't happen very often because I don't like putting them together, but that and the self-loathing aspect of it, because I'm like, it's not good enough, and I go through that whole bullshit. But I've got a bunch of these little sketches that I'll bag up sometimes and sell at Originals Only show where they don't allow reproductions for anyone but digital or photography.
Just saying. Just saying.
I didn't say anything bad. That's just the rules,
for sure.
Right?
So anyway, that's something that as I was listening to Trés and Helene's talk that kind of jumped out at me. But man, there's just so much great stuff you guys talked about that we're actually going to turn it into 2 episodes.
I kind of lose my sense of time when I talk to Trés and Helene. And it's kind of felt like one of those dinners where the time goes away and the server starts tapping their foot and going, can I bring anything else? But we really did get into a lot of topics. And
I will say when that talk clocked in at 2 hours and 25 minutes, Will, I was thinking, is this really a 1 episode or is this 2? What have I got myself into here?
Yeah, there were so many things that I left on the table too that I really wanted to talk about. I wanted to kind of he barely touched on his talking about the prankster monk. And there is a prankster in all modern religions except for Christianity. I wanted to broach that subject with him when I didn't get a chance to. I wanted to talk to him about going down into Mexico with Genna and Daryl, and we didn't get into that. So there's so many more stories that I feel like it could have been a whole series, but I'm generous for all the time that they gave us.
But what we got was gold. So we'll have to talk to him about that another time, because these topics about spirituality and about finding joy, and I mean, it really recharged my batteries, and I really am looking forward to everybody hearing what he has to say. So here we go. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's jump right into it and talk to Trés and Helene Taylor from Selma, Alabama. This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap.
the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
So, Will, it's that time of year again when we all need to start getting stuff ready for taxes.
Thanks for that, Douglas. I appreciate that. We all do, quite literally. I did get an email recently from Zap. They were talking about doing line items and keeping everything together in one place.
Yeah, that's right. I tried it out for myself. So when I was logged into Zap, I went to my profile, and one of the options further down the page is to download your transaction history.
Amazing. That's after you've proven to them that you're not a robot by correctly identify the tractor before you play that lovely game.
So once you've identified that you're an actual human, it's super easy just to select your date range, and then it will create a report of all your purchases so you can hand off those booth fees and application fees directly to your accountant.
Come on, Will, you're a movie star. You got that handsome movie star
you
look.
are.
I don't know about that. It's waning. Man, it's so good. We've tried this for so long, and it's so nice to hear your voices and see your faces.
I didn't think it was ever going to happen.
I didn't think so either.
One challenge after another. I had bronchitis, then COVID, then bronchitis again, and now a sinus infection, and then the tornado, and it's crazy.
Man, we are going to get down into all of that, but yeah, it really has been a comedy of errors. I feel like I've been your kiss of death. As soon as I announced on the show that I was going to have, we got Trey and Helene Taylor coming up, and then you guys just started falling apart.
I know. It's like you cursed us, Will. Actually, I'm feeling like Job of the Black Belt with all of these challenges, man. I tell you.
It's good to finally have you guys on the podcast. You've been on my radar to talk to you for a long time, and you have an interesting story. And let's get right down into it. I kind of wanted to start with a little bit of history. I talk again, like all the time to you guys at shows, and I've seen you for years, but let's kind of talk just briefly about how you guys got together, just kind of a little bit of your background here.
Trey, let me do the 1 minute story and then you do the long one.
Yeah.
The 1 minute story is I met Trey soon after he quit his job as a biochemist to become a full-time artist.
Oh, wow.
And he was calling himself a folk artist then. And I was a big collector of folk art and coming out of a marriage and knew his brother.
Okay.
And I said to his brother, I'm falling in love with you. Don't you have a brother? And he goes, well, actually, I have this one. I call him Picasso, and he lives in the woods. And I was like, that's the one.
That's the one you want. Yeah.
The day that I met Trey, which we kind of had to trick him to come meet me. He didn't really want to meet the divorcee. I don't know why.
Everybody knows the divorcees are hot to trot. I mean, that's
we learned
that from Happy Days, like way back when.
It was true at the time as well. Yeah. But his car was full of wet paintings, and that was really, really attractive to me. Mm-hmm. So the 1 minute story is he quit his job, took a whole leap of faith to follow this life as an artist, and I caught him.
That's amazing.
And I was really kind of the perfect partner at that point. I have a degree in art, a minor in photography, and I loved folk art, understood the passion of making stuff out of anything and needing to make art. And so I was an instant good partner for that. I promoted him and, believed in him and supported him physically and financially until he literally made it. So
yeah. Well, you've got that great supportive type personality that is kind of integral a lot of times in this industry too. They have that other person that picks up the slack and kind of supports the other person. It's an amazing thing to kind of see the way you guys react and interact with each other.
We are 100% team with Trey's career for sure.
I mean, that was the way when I first asked you guys. I think I came up to you in Cherry Creek and asked if you wanted to do the show, and he was like, not without her. We're doing it together if we're doing it at all, But yeah, you give me the less Reader's Digest version, Trey.
Well, I'll pick up on the part of the hot to trot divorcees and tell you, I was tricked into coming down to help my brother. And she walked in and she was looking really good. But I looked at that and I said, that's dangerous. Stay away from that. But then she asked to see my art, and I gave her this little book, just this little tiny little portfolio that I made. And I gave it to her, and I watched her studying them and didn't say a word. And so that raised my first eyebrow. And then I thought, God, that's so curious. I mean, I was not even just a comment, nothing. And then she offered to my brother to help us. And she went to Lowe's and loaded up her van with all the materials that we were needing. And the entire time that she was gone, my brother and I were studying the wall, talking about how we needed to hammer this, that, and the other. And she comes back, unloads, and starts hammering away. And that got the other eyebrow open. And then it was sort of from there.
That's that sounds, when you meet the person, you meet the right people. I feel like whether it's a friend or a romantic interest, and it tends to be more like a recognition than it is like an attraction. I feel like that's what I'm hearing from you guys, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, then afterwards, I was smitten. I would send her little poems wrapped up all, like she'd have to unfold them, and it'd take you 30 minutes to open these things.
He was a very good courter.
Right.
And
is that the same town? Like, is that you guys,
no.
What town are we talking about? Is this?
No, this is in a place called Mentone, Alabama.
Okay.
It's an old home, a summer home that my family owned. And we spent our summers there. It's up in the mountains, northeast corner of Alabama. And so I was up there. I had just come back from Japan. I actually got kicked out of Japan, but that's a whole nother story. And I
like stories, Trey. I want to hear some stories.
Oh, I've got them. It's just you'll have to signal to me like, okay, that's enough.
All right, next. I'm good at that. That's all right.
Yeah.
So you had just gotten kicked out of Japan.
Yeah. I'd gotten kicked out of Japan. I came back to this place, our summer home, and I was making art. I was just consumed with this passion, this newly found passion. I'd only been painting for about a year and a half now.
Wow.
And it was already a crazy, crazy adventure of going to Japan for, I think I had 3 shows there. I mean, it was just crazy. But when I met Helene, the first time we actually had a date, she came up, went out in the back, and I gathered all these found objects, and we sat down, and she was going through a lot of pain at the time because of this recent divorce. And so we just sat down, and I threw all these materials onto the floor of the porch, and the two of us made this piece of art together, didn't say a word.
Amazing.
And at the end of it, after we'd finished, we looked at it. We named it Pulling Off All the Old Masks Just to See the Flowers Bloom Again. And it's hanging in where is that piece, honey?
It's upstairs in the hall.
Yeah, it's
That's
in our
incredible.
house.
I was going to say, you have to hang on to that one. Yeah. That's an important piece. That's a groundbreaker.
Yeah, it's important.
So you guys, you mentioned, Trey, you started out your career as something totally different. You were a biochemist and you started that out. Were you always interested in art as far as that goes? Were you always
I was interested,
kind of inspired to make art, or what happened?
I was interested in writing. That was my passion. I was an English major in university. The first time I went off to Japan, I packed a little portable typewriter, jumped on a container ship, went to Australia, traveled all through there, got up to Japan where I lived for 3 years. And while I was there, I was trying to become the next great Southern writer. But my stories were awful, terrible. I was surrounded by artists all my life. My mother, my brother, my sister, they were all artists. I dated artists. And I used to kind of look at their talent, and I actually was a little, envious and always thought, I wish I could draw a rabbit, just a rabbit, and they can just execute so easily. I mean, I could see hints of this stuff coming through me. The first time was when I was on the container ship, this German container ship. I was told to go down into the hull and paint. And you have to wear this little, this miner's light. And I went down there and just painted these very crude nudes, and just kind of like I was in a cave. And I thought the next workaway is going to go down there, and it will just become this history of all these artists or non-artists down there doing graffiti, basically.
So, Trey, you threw little snippets of stories here. You were talking about Japan, but then you were also talking about learning how to paint and going down into the bowels of a German ship. We gotta maybe start this over a little bit. Tell me, were you in the military?
No.
Is that what you were talking about? Were you in the
by
Navy?
the way, you're dealing with an ADD storyteller, so no.
Good.
So there's so much backstory, but I'm going to keep it really short. So after, I think this was in '87, I was heading to Japan to work as an English teacher. And I was really interested, in traveling. I wanted to travel the whole world. And at that time, I was interested in writing. So as I was mentioning, I had this little portable typewriter in my backpack. And I had met someone who told me, you can work your way to Australia on a German container ship for free. And that really got my interest, because at the time, I was afraid of flying. So never mind going out on a ship for 2 weeks and hitting these 40, 50-foot waves. No, that's not a problem. It's just the idea of flying. So I traveled around in Australia for 3 months, hitchhiking and just, wild experiences. But the idea was to go all the way to the tip of Queensland, which is known as Thursday Island. And then I was going to canoe, bus, rickshaw, whatever it took, all the way up through Southeast Asia and up to Japan. But I ran out of money in Australia after 3 months, so I managed to get back to Sydney, Australia. I had like 4 quarters in my pocket. I said, I got to find the first job that is just like, I can pick up the phone and call and they'll hire me. And it was washing cars. So I got that.
Yeah.
And then I called the youth hostel and I said, I don't have any money, but I'll pay you by the end of the week. And so they gave me a place to stay. But I had a deadline. I was running out of time, and I was going to have to be in Japan on a certain day.
What was the deadline for that? For your teaching job?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so, when you're working at washing cars and trying to get an airline ticket, this is going to take months. But the interesting thing happened was this English language school had put out a notice that a lot of their staff had come down with some kind of illness, and it was an emergency that they get some substitutes to come in.
Oh, wow. So come in early.
And so I was able to get this just short-term job, go in and teach for, I don't know, I guess it was 2 weeks. And I got enough money for my airline ticket. Now I've got to get on a plane, which I'm just, extremely terrified of at this point. So I drank, I think, at the airport in the duty free. I just went ahead and drank like, I don't know, half a bottle of scotch or something. And I get on the airplane, and it hasn't hit yet, but I'm feeling really good. And it was a plane filled with Japanese high school students who had come on a school trip to Australia to try and use their English. There must have been 100 of them in the back where I was. I remember turning around as we're all trying to settle in, and I got up and I was going to do my first English lesson, and I got all the students to sing, "Hi ho, it's off to Japan we go." And then the next thing I know, I'm waking up in Tokyo, and I had passed out on a student's shoulder, apparently. This was an 8-hour flight, and I'm waking up as we're coming in. They had put a blanket over me, and it was just wild.
They take care of teacher.
Right.
And then you find all these kids right in your class, right? As soon as you get back to, exactly.
Hey, we know you.
How we met our teacher.
The story began with how did you become an artist? Were you an artist all along? And you were talking about the first painting you did was in the belly of that ship on the way to Australia. And so that's where that story started.
ADD storyteller.
It's good, man. We're going to put Douglas's editing skills to the test. See if we can chop this up and make a narrative out of it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tighten them up, Douglas. Don't worry. We got this. So you're in Japan and you're teaching. I kind of wanted to get just a little bit of groundwork as far as how you started your art career, really. And it sounds like you were always inspired by art. You're always surrounded by art. And then you wanted to create. Does that make kind of some sense?
It does. I wanted to write. I didn't know I was a visual storyteller. That's what I ended up discovering. And it was in Japan that I was there for 3 years, and I met a lady who, she was very creative. And she introduced me kind of to art again, but we made this thing called, it was a sculpture out of garbage. And we came up with this idea. We would film it, the making of it, and then we would take it out onto the street. In Japan, on a certain day, everybody brings their garbage and leaves it on a certain place in the street. And then you hear the truck coming by playing Fleur de Lis, and everybody's, it's just so strange. But so we set up the sculpture there, and then hid behind like a snow blind and recorded people coming up to drop their garbage off and see this sculpture. The Japanese, there's an expression, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So when you have half the population of America living on the equivalent of the East Coast of the U.S., you've got to have a lot of cooperation, and so
a lot of structure within the community too.
And so we were being a little bit of a rascal and kind of like testing that, to see how they would respond.
What was the sculpture like? What was the what did you guys make?
There was a mannequin that Birgit was her name. She found this mannequin, so we started with the mannequin, and then we put this sheet behind it, and then we just started taking paint and throwing paint at it, and took a giant daikon radish and printed like a sun in red to where it looks like, this is the land of the rising sun. That's their symbol.
Yeah.
But this thing was dripping a little bit. It's the kind of things you don't do in in a place as conservative as this place that I was in.
Right.
It's like that.
You could barely get away with it in Alabama.
This was the Alabama of Japan that I ended up in, but so we filmed that, and I actually still have that video. It's pretty.
Oh,
pretty
that's
fun.
Incredible! Yeah, I would love to see that.
So then,
but you got, that kind of kicks you started. You're starting to make visual art there, and
and she taught me this thing called blind contour drawing, which I'd never heard of. And she says, I'm just gonna lay here on the sofa, and I want you, without looking at your paper and everything, just draw what you see. And so I did, and when I turned around, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. It was just a very stylistic image of her, and I thought it was going to be a mess. But that really, really sparked my interest in painting, but I still haven't got it yet,
Sure.
And then my daughter, she came to visit and lived with me for a year while I was over there, and I put her in school. And so to keep her entertained and to enjoy our time together, I took brown paper and wrapped the entire apartment that I was living in brown paper, and we would just draw, together on the walls.
How old was she at the time?
She was 9.
9. That's perfect.
So, and in some ways she was a teacher, right, for me, by showing me how to get back to that part of me that as children, we were all painting, right? I mean, we're all drawing and painting. And then at some place, somewhere, something happens, and some of those get through it and still keep doing it, and others get, squashed.
Right. It's interesting to see. I've got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and to see my 14-year-old she got squashed at some point, and I'm trying to figure out how to open that back up. But she and her little sister, who is not squash, and she's always had this innate talent that is a little bit different. It's a little more. She's been wide open. She was the kid that was always told that she's the artist in the family. And so the 14-year-old, who I think makes incredible artwork, and I've always tried to keep her open to it, but it somehow kind of got shut along the way. Oh, I suck. I'm terrible. I'm not good at this. And I try to keep that open, but it's wild to see that in person shut in one human where it's still open in the other, and how to keep those doors open. But you're right. Like how to access that. You'd look at my artwork versus your artwork, and I'm incredibly uptight, and I'm trying to be, I want it to look as much like the photograph as I can, which I wish I could let that go, and I can't access that childhood freedom in my mind like I'd like to. But you seem to have had that kind of has that always been open for you?
So the way that you paint, Will, was what intimidated me. My brother is very much like, he paints in the style of, it's got to be a certain way. And so there's a lot of expectation. And as a result, there are these just wonderfully, beautifully executed drawings. I was intimidated by that. So I just didn't think I could ever do that, right? But I didn't realize that actually my visual language was not to paint like that until much later,
right,
in this journey of discovering myself as an artist. That really didn't happen until years later, 98. So the story in Japan is happening from 87 to 90. And I had those couple little experiences there,
where you start to kind of open it back up. Is your brother burdened by that kind of style? Do you feel like?
Yes. Especially, so my brother and my sister are really, really talented artists. And the way they are burdened with that style reminds me of the way I was burdened when I was trying to write. Like I literally look like Jack Nicholson just writing the same sentence,
Yeah, that's what the reason I ask is because I feel that way. I definitely feel burdened by style.
I know Trey's going to talk next about his influence with Southern folk artists. And I think there's a real freedom when you are an untrained artist, that you have not gone through schooling. You make a piece of art and then you're critiqued. And there is pretty much no way to avoid that type of schooling if you're, getting an art degree. And you perform for the critique. That's what you do.
You really do.
I've always said, when people say, my daughter's thinking about going to art school, I'm like, don't go to art school. It will steal your creativity. And the work I do outside of working for Trey is I facilitate art experiences in the hospital. And so it's just to relieve people's anxiety and stress and get their mind off things. And so I have to go in with the idea that most of the people that are going to make art with me today do not have an art background. And they have that story of, I'm not an artist, my brother's the artist, or I can't draw, I'm not creative. And that is not true. Every single person on the planet is creative. And so I create a project so that it's not intimidating, so they can be creative. 45 minutes of creative activity reduces your stress level. So anyway, my point is, there are so many people that come to my tables that talk about an art teacher that gave them an F or whatever. And I was like, well, that was a bad art teacher, because you cannot fail art. Unless you don't go to class or don't do an assignment, you can't fail. I mean, there really are no mistakes in art. Trey was fortunate enough to fashion his art from the get-go out of Southern folk artists who make art out of anything. And the circles that we stayed in the very beginning of his career, there was the masking tape guy, and there's the guy that makes things out of bottle caps, and there's the guy that makes things out of, plastic jugs. And Trey became the artist that makes art on tar paper. And there's just a whole lot of freedom when you're an untrained artist, that there's no mistakes and everything is much more available. And he doesn't have to draw a rabbit. He doesn't have to draw something that is realistic. In fact, his style now is very recognizable, and people really love that childlike drawing. But he too struggles. I hear the struggles at the kitchen table about not being able to access that childlike imagination.
Yeah.
And as festival artists, just like being students and you're in front of a critique, there's that same element of being festival artists. I mean, we're not really getting critiqued, but we're getting picked to purchase.
Yeah, there is a freedom in that Southern folk art. I remember being next to somebody I was in Atlanta, called the Virginia Highland Show, and I was set up next to this woman, and I'd be the first one to admit, but my first reaction to this was like, what is this bullshit? And I'm seeing her, she literally finished a Coke and stapled it to a board she had at her feet, painted some wings on it, and called it the Coke Can Angel. And it was like in like less than 10 seconds. And I was like, where does she, and I've gone to art school, and I'm like, Mr. Illustration degree and all this, and I'm all uptight, and I'm like, where does she get off being able to do this? But I look at it now, and it's really just jealousy, and it's not super highbrow, but there's a freedom in it, and it doesn't have to be super highbrow. It just is what it is. And I'm sure the woman, I wish I could remember her name. She's passed away in the last 4 or 5 years, but she ended up winning Best in Show at Virginia Highland, and just total freedom, just stuff leaned up against the poles and stacks of artwork, and I came to be able to admire that and get over my own hang-ups, but it did take a while, and it's still taking a while, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you say you didn't really find your style, you didn't find your way until, say, about 96. Yeah. Where does that take you? Like, what happens in 96? Okay. Where are you? So
96, I actually been working in biochemistry. I went and got a master's in biochemistry. And now in 96, this is at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and I moved with my boss, actually he was my mentor at the time, to San Diego. And while I was in San Diego, I was there for 4 years working in his lab. I've lived all over the world, but the only place I experienced culture shock was in San Diego, because there were so many people there, but it was very hard to make connections with people. They were always, people were always so busy going out doing things.
Yeah.
It was a very outdoor activity oriented town.
Yeah.
And I was involved in a relationship before I left Birmingham. Like a lot of long distance relationships, they're either going to resolve that or it's going to, fall apart. And so, of
course,
this relationship came to an end. And so I was unhappy with my work. I was just in a very depressed place in my life at that time. And so a friend of mine, this is in 98, a friend of mine called me and said, come home for Christmas and let's go visit all the folk artists. And so I came home, and there was, I guess, about 12 of these guys, the jewels, they're all gone now, but Mose Tolliver, Jimmy Lee Sudduth, Howard Fenster, Lonnie Holly, Charlie Lucas. So we met them all. And this friend of mine was collecting art, and I bought a little bit. I was too poor, though, at the time. That experience of walking into these self-taught artists and seeing their world just blew me open. I remember just walking around in awe and just thinking, where in the hell am I? And so
it's like another world.
It was.
I mean, their studios.
I know it. So the last one I met, his name was R.A. Miller. And he lived in a tar paper shack, of all things. And he built whirligigs, and it was so magical all around his house, with just all these whirligigs. And then he had this one character called Blow Oscar. And the reason he called him Blow Oscar is because his cousin would drive by every day and blow his horn, and his name was Oscar. So he, and of course,
that's incredible.
When you're in the presence of people like this who are living such creative and joyful and not, I mean, they're poor, very poor.
Yeah.
I want what they have, they're poor, but they're happy. I'm poor and unhappy. And so R.A. Miller, he and I were just having this really great exchange. I was taking his picture and I told him, I said, I wish I could paint like you do. And he had this Southern accent. He's chewing tobacco and he spits it out, and he says, well, you can, you're a folk artist too. And so I think, and I tell people this, I think he kind of spiritually, without me knowing it, handed me like a spiritual baton paintbrush,
Yeah.
And so a month later, so I went home, and a month later, I was riding around in San Diego. I had a bicycle at the time. That's how I got around. I didn't have a car, and it was a Sunday afternoon, I think, and I was riding around in the park. It was a beautiful day, and I come up to this museum, and I saw all this wood stacked up in front, and I thought, I'm going to go home and make a painting. And so I put one of the boards on the back, went home, had some house paint down in the basement, came upstairs, and I made a painting of just very crude, but kind of in the same style as in the hull of the ship, of a man and a woman sort of flying apart in opposite directions with a heart between the two. And that experience was so cathartic. It was like falling into, I tell people, I fell into the now. I fell into that present moment, and I was creating, and I wasn't consumed with all of the things that I was constantly finding myself consumed by. And so that was just such an incredible experience that I thought, okay, let's do another one. And so basically what I ended up doing was a year and a half of therapy, and my house was filled with therapy, with this art that I was just making simply, to try and heal myself.
He told me he had to crawl out the window because there were so many wet paintings all over his apartment. So, and I said in the very beginning, the first thing that made me fall in love with him was his car full of wet paintings. So he classifies now as a crazy folk artist, which is just, so attractive. Anyway, so he had to climb out the windows.
That's incredible. And that guy really did kind of hand you the baton, didn't he? I mean, it was almost like permission too. I mean, it's almost permission to just let it out, let the creativity kind of flow.
Yeah, well, just like we were saying before, you had this, someone said to you between, birth and 14 that you're not an artist. And instead, this elderly man who lived below the level of poverty is what, we have here in the Southeast. And of course, lots of places in America. But here's this really, really poor person full of joy. And he's saying to Trés, you are an artist. So it's kind of the affirmation that he just needed, that permission.
Right.
It's the hero's journey. It really is. The Joseph Campbell, if you know that, all the stages.
Of course.
And so he was kind of in that, I forget all the parts of it, but he's the calling. He's basically, or the mentor, and saying, go do this. This is how, go put a T on I tell people, go put a T on the end of your pain, and paint your way out of it. And
nice.
And I really had never any intentions of making a career out of it. It was just that I was rediscovering joy. And the way I ended up sort of shifting to becoming a career and leaving biochemistry is there was a lady who owned a hair salon / folk art gallery. And so she would put all of the paintings on the walls there, and she'd have this captured audience. And so she heard I had this folk art collection from Alabama. and she wanted to come and see it. And so I invited her into my home, and we were looking at the Mose Tollivers and the Howard Fencers, and she could see the door in my bedroom where a lot of these paintings were lying on the floor. She could see them. And she said, well, who did those? And I tried to discourage her and said, oh, that's a little artist you've never heard of.
Nobody's ever heard of this guy. Yeah.
And she was really interested. She said, no, I'm really interested. Who did these? I said, well, that's my art. And so she right there offered to, she said, can I try to sell it? And I said, sure. I don't know how well you're going to do with that, but so she took some of the paintings to her gallery, and she called a lady in Beverly Hills to tell her about this new artist that she had found.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
That week, a lady in Beverly Hills paid her $500 for a painting that I had made. And I was just, I when she told me that,
it's that first one, isn't it? Isn't it always that first one that gets that charge in you? It's like, wait a minute, what?
I could not believe it.
Yeah.
I think it took me 2 weeks to make that when I was in biochemistry.
Right. I talked to Ben Fry about that one time. I've gotten discouraged with artwork over the years. Sometimes I'm like, man, I'm gonna go bartend for a while and just kind of get my head straight or something. And he kind of, if you've talked to Ben at all, he's got that wink, and he winks and he's like, what's the most money you ever made bartending in one night?
Exactly.
And I'm like, God damn it, and it's like, well, he's like, what's the worst art show you've ever had?
So Daryl has a way of bringing me back to reality in the same way.
Yeah.
He's always...
Daryl definitely has that way. He doesn't have the age on him to be the art show Yoda, but he definitely is. But then, back to the Joseph Campbell, I mean, that fits right in. It's like George Lucas got all of that from the legend, and the hero's journey. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So there is a topic that I'm very interested in broaching with you. We spoke a while back, and you had started to talk about this kind of experience with dealing with a shaman and ayahuasca ceremonies and Peru. And I wanted to talk to you a little about that. I've read the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind, and it's just a topic that I'm really interested in as far as that goes. And I don't know how to jump right into it. And I apologize to the listeners too, but I was born in Richmond, Virginia, and my father comes from High Point, North Carolina, and my mother grew up in Cartersville, Georgia. And when I talk to a good Southerner, you start hearing that South in my mouth come back out.
I like that.
I can hear it in my headphones, and I'm like, it's really, I come by it honest, but you're going to hear a little bit more of that in this week's episode. And I do think it's funny I'm like, man, I can hear myself doing it.
Well,
we're just pulling you over to the dark side.
To the light is what you're doing.
Jim Morrison got it wrong when he said the West is the best. It's the South is the best, but it's
That's
pretty.
right.
You gotta wade through a bunch of crazy stuff here.
Yeah, you do, but I do miss it, man, and I love hearing y'all talk too. So anyway, but how do we jump into that topic?
Okay.
Like, how is that something that you became interested in? And
it's actually,
tell me some of your experiences.
It's all actually ties in very much with the art because I've always been on sort of a spiritual journey to kind of find out what's on that other side. And so that explains my interest in the monk as a character in my art.
Mm-hmm.
I've studied a lot of Buddhism and Sufism and Christian mystics. I just read a lot of that. And it's just very interesting to me. I mean, it was already there before I ended up going to Peru. But the way I got to Peru was when I was a biochemist. I had convinced my mentor, he had an organic chemist in the lab, and they were spending months trying to design one little compound to test. And it just was a lot of work. And I was always interested in this anthropology called ethnobotany, which has to do with the study of medicinal plants. And that's how I ended up in biochemistry, is because I wanted to study with the godfather of them all. His name was Richard Evans Schultes.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
I actually wrote to him, and we had a correspondence. And this while I was in Japan, he was actually willing to take me on as, like this English major. But
oh, really? Yeah.
But he said, well, you probably should take a course in genetics. And he was like, and all these other people were going, dude, you got to have a biology degree to come to these graduate programs, which I did. So I went and, and then I ended up in biochemistry. But I designed my thesis, which was to go to the Amazon and collect plants and to develop a drug screening program, in this case, looking for drugs, novel compounds. I don't want to get too technical, so I'm trying to keep it.
Sure. No, it's really interesting, though. I mean, you're studying that for your master's as far as healing drugs?
No.
Is that...
So, all right, I'll go just a little technical. So what I was looking at were these things called glycosaminoglycans, and just think of them as the Velcro that holds cells together. They're also landing platforms for signal proteins to come in and land, and viruses and bacteria. And so what my mentor was interested in is finding an inhibitor that might be able to short circuit the cells from making these platforms, these landing platforms that viruses and things like that. But it's, that's the simplest answer there. So
yeah, that's a great description.
And so I told him, Jeff, who was my boss, mentor, I said, the Amazon is the treasure trove for chemicals. I said, you should let me go down there and research and collect plants and design this program, or my thesis around this. And he let me do it.
Nice.
So
it's incredible.
So I went to the Amazon, spent 3 months working with a Peruvian botanist. And while I was there, I knew about ayahuasca, and I was very interested in ayahuasca because it's a culture that sees the illness as related to the spirit world. And that's not unlike what our modern psychologists think, they don't call it spirits, but we have different names for, manic depression and all of this. Well, they just see these things as brought on by the spirits. And so this is just
almost like a sickness of spirit, is it not?
A sickness of spirit, yeah.
And to our listeners who are, maybe new to us, we don't want to send everybody to the Google machine in the middle of the podcast. But ayahuasca, tell us a little bit about ayahuasca, like what it actually
ayahuasca is the Quechuan term for. I mean, I'll just be a little technical here. Is the genus species is Banisteriopsis caapi, and it's a vine. And it's actually in the Peruvian culture, or particularly in the Quechuan culture, it is considered the little death, I guess, the vine. So what the curanderos and the shamans use this, and it's actually a mixture of another plant, and they make a tea out of it. And so what these curanderos, I worked with a curandero. I didn't work with, the difference between a curandero and a shaman is they're doing the same thing. A shaman really has to do more with the indigenous kind of pure cultures, but the curanderos are doing the same thing. They're using ayahuasca as a way to heal. So the tea is boiled, and then, let's see, I lost my train of thought. So
sorry about that. I just wanted to give a little bit more technical on what it was.
But basically, it's a hallucinogen.
Yes, it's a hallucinogen.
It's a serious hallucinogen that helps you get into that dream world, that spirit world that we're talking about, opening your mind.
So the curanderos, they actually have these songs. They're called icaros, and the icaros are to call the spirits in. And then there's another thing called the procession of the plants. And these, they actually visualize the plants coming through it like in a procession, and they are the healing plants. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. I could go on and on and on. But
yeah, please.
So what they do is they also can control the visions based on these Icaros.
The shaman
The
can
shaman, the
control the vision?
curandero can control based on...
Because they're like guides,
They're
really,
guides,
right?
Right.
yeah. Psychopomps, I guess, is another way that we can call it. And so in my own experience, I met this curandero, and this in 91. He invited me to a session. It was actually just he and I and another Peruvian who owned this, which it was an ethnobotanical garden. He was growing medicinal plants there out in the forest. It was called Sachamama, which is in reference to the anaconda that's in that area. So in my own experience, I partook of this tea. It's an emetic, so you find yourself you have to leave the circle, and you have to go and take care of business and then come back. And at the time, so I had a little flashlight, and I would leave the circle and shine out see where I was. But after a while, it turns out that your eyes become so dilated. It's like night goggles. You can see everything, and it's incredible. So at this point now, I don't know, it was probably the third or fourth time I left the circle. You lose your balance. It's very, very hard to walk. And I couldn't make it back to the circle. There was this rain kind of falling down, and it was a light drizzle. And I remember sort of being just enough, but still not quite in the circle and feeling safe.
Yeah.
And while I was out there, I started having these terrible kind of hallucinations of snakes and this just whirling disc of something very evil looking coming and whirling, and so I'm out there and snakes are all just around, and I have a terrible fear of poisonous snakes. I guess we all do in some form.
Sure.
So I'm lying there, and eventually I make it back to the circle. And now at this point, the ritual has sort of ended, and I go to it was a little cabin with a mosquito net. And so I went to sleep, finally managed to get sleep. But the next morning, I'm sure you're familiar with Leonard Cohen's New Skin for an Old Ceremony album. Do you know that?
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I felt like. I felt like I had been reborn. Like
oh, wow.
It was such an incredible sense of like I had to go through the fire to be purified.
Yeah, through hell. Yeah.
And it was hell.
And we've been accused, Douglas and I have on our show here, of having like our pre-talk is somebody who didn't like the show said, I can't handle any more of your nauseating banter. And so feel free if you're walking out into the woods and you're shitting yourself and you're flopping down in the mud, and you feel free to say however you describe it, however, not to be vulgar, but however you need to say it is how you need to say it. But this is a pretty raw experience. I mean, you're in a circle with like how many people are
there was just myself and the curandero and the owner of the there was three of us.
Gotcha. And are they experiencing this with you?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was the first time, and as I said, I came out of there just feeling incredibly cleansed. That was not what I had expected. I was actually hoping to go to Paradiso and not to the Inferno, right? And
right.
So I
mean, what do you think about that experience as far as like, how does that make you feel awakened? If it's such a negative experience, how do you think that makes you feel on the other side?
Well, it's a great question. I believe that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience here.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my quote. That's a Teilhard Chardin quote. But I believe that. And so it's not just this material world, and we get consumed by the material world, but I think there is something, we're here for some purpose,
Yeah.
And I think that purpose is to discover. That was, I just happen to be someone who's just curious about just about anything that crosses my path. What squirrel? Look.
And do you think that's everybody's purpose, or do you feel like that's your own?
No, I think we're all here, that's certainly my position and my place. I define the purpose of my life is to search for the truth, really. And I think the truth can be found inward. And, I'm the kind of guy, like I would love to be able to meditate, and I've tried it for years. And sometimes I get on the meditation wagon, but then I'll fall off, and because the physical world keeps me very stimulated, but I also try very hard to get back to the place that I consider to be what all of this is about, right? And I personally am on that journey to discover that inner journey. And that, so to tie it back to the art, my art is about this monk. His name's William Guadalupe. He's a rascal monk. He sneaks out of the monastery to dance with the Cuban cha-cha girls. But his journey in life is to bring joy into the world and to help people find their inner joy, just like I did when I was discovering painting.
Yeah.
It's kind of I guess it's a lighthearted approach to the spiritual journey. I don't think it should be so, in my own personal life. I think it's, sometimes it can be taken too seriously and people lose sense of humor,
Yeah.
And so I mean, if there's this, whatever this creator thing is out there, it's got a great sense of humor. I mean, it made this thing called a kangaroo, for God's sakes, and so.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I feel like that's what I've always appreciated about you is a certain spirituality, but the irreverence that lives within that is what I respond to when I talk to you, and kind of enjoy that. I don't know. The humor to me is it can be my biggest self-defense mechanism, and it can make my wife crazy when we're trying to have a serious conversation, and I'm like,
but
I'll wreck it. I'll wreck it.
Yeah, but you're really good at it, Will. Your humor.
Thank you, man.
Really...
I don't know. So, we do go through this life, and you can take things real seriously, or you can open it up and go the other way with it. And I appreciate that about you.
Thank you, Will.
So Helene gets turned on by a car full of wet paintings, huh? That's pretty interesting when you think about that one, Will.
I love it, man. I love it. It's like going into a theater for the first time and smelling tempera paint and people working on sets. I still get kind of charged up by that smell of old paint. Yeah. So I know what she means, and they're such a cool couple.
Totally.
And
I loved hearing
really
the courtship story too, about how she's falling in love with his brother. And then she's like, I'm falling in love with you. Don't you have a brother? And he's like, well, I actually do. And everything he described about him was everything that was the lid for her pot. So it was perfect perfect match.
Yeah, those, he's always, both of those guys just bring kind of a just a positive energy and a positive light kind of to the area wherever they are in a show. I always look forward to seeing them.
And when he brought up at the end, when he said that we are spiritual beings having a physical existence or a physical experience, I thought, oh my God, he's like totally speaking my language. That gave me goosebumps. It's true. So I think about that in every aspect of, like, for example, what I've been going through with my foot and everything. I keep bringing up to my wife, I'm so grateful to everything you do. I'm so grateful for everything you're getting me through this period. And she says, look, this situation isn't just about you. This situation is something I'm going through too, spiritually and on a higher plane. And there are things we're learning, our physical lessons through this. So to have a partner like that, for me to have that partnership with her, it's an amazing thing. And that was something that I found with listening to Trés and Helene, that they have that similar kind of thing too.
Yeah, we're all getting older, right? I mean, we're starting to enter the in sickness portion of the in sickness and health promise that we made each other, right?
For sure.
So yeah, we're all lucky to have that for sure, and it's amazing what Renee's been able to do for you and bring you through to this next step. But you're working in the studio, finally, kind of trying to get your chops back, to use a musician's term. Woodshedding it a little bit and trying to get back up there and get your muscle memory. I'm trying to figure out how to create more space. So back to the Independent Artist Book Club. Okay. I've been reading that Rick Rubin book.
Oh, cool. I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the kind of book, honestly, that you can pick up and put down and read, 20 pages of it in a flash. And then it even has a little section in the back with some lined paper,
so you can take your own notes.
Oh yeah, I'm such an anal retentive as far as books go. I don't like to bend a corner or dog ear a corner, but I'm tempted to just write this one up and cover it in highlighter and sketches. I mean, there's some really basic spirituality practice stuff that all has to do with the arts, and it's a really bottom shelf kind of super reachable, attainable information that it just done in tiny little snippets that you can take or leave. Yeah. But it's helping me. And there's another book I'm reading too where I've come across two different passages where I was talking about creating space in my work. I've run across two other musicians. It's like Bob Dylan and Wynton Marsalis are talking about the music and the melody existing in the space between the notes. So I don't know, it's the universe talking to me and trying to tell me to open it up a little bit more.
I'm on the same boat with you on that one. I've been watching his 4 or 5 part documentary too that was on Showtime called Shangri-La. Talks about his
Rick Rubin's?
Yeah, Rick Rubin's. Yeah, cool. And so I haven't had a chance to pick up the book yet, but watching that, and I'm really also going back into the studio with a new kind of clearing the slate, clearing the distractions out. My phone is staying in the house when I go outside. I'd find myself peeking at it when I had a little moment while Renee's doing her thing. And you know what? It just pulls you out of the process. I'm trying to stay really connected and present. So I've got enough distractions just trying to just get from point A to point B. But I think it's going to be a bigger thing to really step away from that.
Yeah, that's great. Good luck with that. And I'm sure that you're probably even more addicted to your phone after having spent so much time,
it's true,
using it as kind of a crutch getting through this whole period. So,
yeah.
Speaking of distractions, you're talking to one right now. Let's hang up on my dumb ass and get to work.
That's right. So just to kind of sum up here this week, we got to hear about Trés and his ayahuasca experience going to the Inferno like Dante did. So we're going to pick up next week with his second experience where he goes into the Paradiso.
Right? Also, we get to talk to Helene. They're living in Selma, Alabama during the George Floyd crisis that this country went through and kind of is continuing to go through. And the Black Lives Matter, they were hit with a kind of a what can we do as artists? And to hear what they did and are doing in Selma, Alabama is incredibly inspiring. What we can do as activists and activism.
I love that whole idea. We've broached it a few times over the couple of seasons here about using art as activism and not just as commerce or something we want to express and something we want to sell and make a living, that you take it to that next level of connecting communities. I mean, that's awesome. I love that part of the talk.
It is. So stay tuned for next week. It's another exciting episode of the Independent Artist Podcast.
But for now, we need to get our asses back in the studio and get some stuff made. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you down the road.
Good luck, sir. See you, everybody.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, find us on social media and engage in these conversations.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.
Oh, and if you like the show, we'd love it if you would give us your 5-star rating and offer up your most creative review on your podcast streaming service. See you next time.